Layla, a woman in her mid-40s, had always been a devoted mother and wife. When she remarried after the sudden death of her first husband, she hoped that the new chapter in her life would bring peace and stability. Her husband, Samir, had a teenage daughter, Nadia, who was a bright but rebellious 17-year-old. Though their relationship was distant at first, Layla tried her best to connect with Nadia, treating her as her own. Life settled into a routine, but Layla never anticipated the profound shift that would come one ordinary evening. Nadia's boyfriend, Tarek, started visiting their home more often. Tarek was a few years older than Nadia, with an air of confidence and a charm that was impossible to ignore. He was respectful towards Layla, always greeting her with a warm smile and a polite hello whenever he came over. It was clear he cared for Nadia deeply, and Layla was pleased to see her stepdaughter so happy. But as Tarek spent more time in the house, Layla began to notice something else, something she couldn't ignore. His attentiveness, his gentle laughter, and the way his eyes seemed to linger just a little too long when they spoke started to stir something inside her. At first, Layla dismissed the feelings as nothing more than a fleeting attraction. After all, Tarek was much younger than her, and he was with Nadia, not her. She reminded herself constantly that these feelings were inappropriate and that she loved her husband and had no intention of betraying anyone. But the more she saw him, the more the chemistry between them seemed to intensify. His small gestures, helping her with groceries, complimenting her cooking, had begun to feel personal, and Layla couldn't help but feel a deep, almost magnetic pull toward him. She felt torn, battling guilt and confusion every time they exchanged a few words or shared a quiet laugh. As the months went by, Layla found herself seeking out Tarek's company more often, even outside of family gatherings. When he dropped by to visit Nadia, Layla would sometimes find excuses to stay in the same room, hoping for another conversation, another connection. The more time they spent together, the more Layla began to question her own emotions. What was it about Tarek that captivated her? Was it just the warmth of his presence, or was it something deeper? She had never felt this way before, and the complexity of her feelings weighed heavily on her conscience. One evening, while Nadia was out with friends, Layla and Tarek found themselves alone in the living room. The conversation was casual at first, but the atmosphere shifted when their eyes met for a split second longer than usual. Layla's heart raced, and she quickly looked away, feeling the rush of guilt and desire collide within her. Tarek, seemingly unaware of the conflict raging within her, simply smiled, his voice soft. "You know, I really admire how much you've done for Nadia. She's lucky to have you." His words were innocent, but they hit her harder than expected. In that moment, Layla realized that her feelings for him weren't something she could ignore anymore. But no matter how strong her emotions had become, Layla knew that this was a boundary she could never cross. Nadia was her stepdaughter, and Tarek was not hers to claim. The realization broke her heart, and she understood that her feelings were nothing more than a fleeting attraction, one that could never come to fruition. After that evening, Layla distanced herself from Tarek, reminding herself of the importance of family, of loyalty, and of the love she had for her husband. Her inner turmoil slowly faded, but the memory of that brief, unspoken connection lingered with her, a bittersweet reminder of a love that could never be. Layla had done her best to push the growing feelings for Tarek out of her mind. She focused on her family, on her duties as a wife and mother, telling herself that what she was feeling was a temporary lapse, something that would fade away in time. But as weeks passed, it became harder to ignore the small, lingering moments. The way Tarek's voice seemed to soothe her when he spoke, or how his presence in the room made her heart flutter for reasons she couldn't fully comprehend. These were not just passing thoughts, they were powerful, undeniable emotions that seemed to pull at her from within. One evening, when Nadia was at a friend's house and Samir was out at a work event, Layla found herself alone in the house with Tarek. He had stopped by to pick up Nadia's belongings, but as he entered the kitchen to say goodbye, their conversation stretched longer than usual. Tarek leaned against the counter, casually mentioning how much he appreciated the way she took care of the family, how comfortable and welcoming the house always felt. His words, so simple yet sincere, made Layla's chest tighten. She found herself smiling, genuinely enjoying the conversation in a way that made her feel vulnerable, as though she had allowed herself to let down her guard for the first time in a long while. There was a brief moment when their eyes met, and it felt like everything else in the room disappeared. The air seemed to grow thick, heavy with something unspoken between them. Layla's pulse quickened. She had been around Tarek enough to know that he was always respectful, always careful in his interactions with her. Yet tonight, there was an underlying energy, an electric tension that seemed to hang between them, making her feel both exhilarated and terrified at the same time. "Layla," Tarek said, breaking the silence. "I really admire how you've handled everything, your family, your life. You're an incredible woman." Her breath caught in her throat. No one had spoken to her like this in years. No one had looked at her with such attention and warmth. The vulnerability she had buried for so long seemed to surface all at once, and she felt herself drawn toward him in a way that felt both exciting and wrong. It was a temptation she hadn't anticipated, and in that fleeting moment, she had no idea how to handle it. "Thank you, Tarek," Layla replied, her voice softer than she intended. I appreciate that." She wanted to say more, to let him know how deeply those words resonated with her, but she quickly pulled herself back, afraid of what she might reveal. There was an awkward silence, and then Tarek stepped back, offering her a casual smile. "Well, I should go. I'll let Nadia know I stopped by." Layla nodded, trying to steady her breath. "Good night, Tarek," she managed to say, watching him leave, her heart still racing. She stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the spot where he had stood, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Was it just a passing flirtation? Or was this something more? And even if it was more, could she allow herself to feel this way? Could she betray the love of her husband and the trust of her stepdaughter? The next few days were a blur. Layla tried to avoid Tarek, keeping herself busy with household chores and spending time with Samir. But she couldn't shake the memory of that moment, the way her body had responded to his presence, the longing that had crept into her heart. She tried to tell herself that it was just a temporary lapse, a moment of weakness. But deep down, she knew that it was much more than that. Each time Tarek visited, Layla's internal conflict grew stronger. She felt drawn to him in ways she hadn't felt in years, and the guilt that came with those feelings gnawed at her. She couldn't bear the thought of destroying her family, of betraying Nadia's trust. But every time Tarek looked at her with that quiet intensity, the line between admiration and something more blurred even further. Layla was left standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing that one wrong step could lead to consequences she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The temptation was there, undeniable and powerful, but so was the realization that her life, her family, was at stake. And the question lingered in her mind, could she resist the pull of desire, or would she fall into the dangerous allure of the forbidden?